All right. Hey, everybody. I am so glad that you have joined us today. So whether you are here with us live and you're jumping in on your lunch break, or whether you're going to be watching this later when you have a minute to breathe and collect your thoughts, you're supposed to be here today because we are just going to be spending time processing through all that God has done. And can you believe it's been a week since the Child Discipleship Forum in Franklin? Some of you weren't there in person, some of you watched it online, but wherever you were, we heard from you that God did amazing things in what you were thinking and feeling. And can I just be one of the ones to first say thank you? Thank you for choosing to join us in this conversation. We Part of the vision and the heartbeat that we have is that we know that these conversations are hard. If we keep avoiding them, then the avoidance really doesn't bring anything except destruction. Because when God has called us to something, what we need to do is walk through this together, founded biblically in what He has given us as truth. So before I get ahead of myself, if I've never had the privilege of meeting you, my name is Melanie Hester, and I serve as the Community Engagement Manager here at Awana. And I am joined today with Ross Cochran and also Brittany Nelson and Josh Navey. Brittany and Josh are both members of the children's ministry community. And we're just going to be spending time together today, processing through all that we heard and experienced, and really beginning to create this timeline of what do we do next? What is that next step? And how do I know which is the thing I'm supposed to do? But before, again, I've said this now twice, obviously I'm ready for this conversation. If you guys haven't already seen at the bottom of your screen, there's this little chat bubble and it has the word chat underneath. I'm really glad that we're stating obvious things today. That's a place for you guys to engage. If you have an idea that God's already given to you, that you know how you're going to implement these thoughts, would you throw that in there? Like that is what we're supposed to be doing together is really just connecting on where we are headed next. So it is finally the time to begin having this conversation. And honestly, one of my favorite things is having these conversations alongside Ross Cochran. So if you guys were online, you got to know Ross and Kelly really well. And so Ross, thank you for being here today, and let's kick this thing off.
No, thank you for having me, Melanie. Brittany and Josh, it is great to meet you. Just, between us and the friends who have joined us already and those who are going to be watching later. I haven't had the privilege, and it's a very strange part of my job that I get to meet someone and then about 3 minutes later start asking them deep questions. But thank you guys for being a part of this journey. The thing I want to start with, Melanie alluded to, we are a week out from the Child Discipleship Forum, which in some ways feels like it just happened, and in some ways feels like it's already been a year. What was the big picture feedback that you took away from the forum? Josh, I want to start with you with that. So what was the top of line things that you were thinking about, or perhaps what was the feedback that you heard? And as Melanie said, those of you who are with us live, this would be a great opportunity for you to answer that question. What was your sort of top line takeaway from that 2-day experience? But yeah, Josh, if you don't mind, how about you kick us off?
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that, Ross. Man, if I'm looking at what I took away most from those couple of days together, it's going to be the weight of the responsibility we have as ministers to kids and to their families. One of my favorite parts was how over and over again it was reminded, it was preached, it was discussed that this is not just a task that is menial or that happens in back hallways or that's out of sight, out of mind, but it is on the forefront of God's heart to His church, is that His little ones would be loved, that they would be discipled, that they would be reminded of what He has done. The gospel would be passed down from one generation to the next. So just the weight of what it is that we get to do in kids ministry, in children's ministry, in child discipleship, even in the name, it kind of, I feel like that was representative of what the messaging was throughout both days, is that this is a serious task. And so we're talking some about it as a team. I showed one of the messages. We'll get into some of the specifics later, but in general, I told them, like, if your immediate takeaway is to do something new, then just stop. Okay. Because the immediate takeaway needs to be, this is so weighty and important, and let that bleed into what you're already doing first. So that was kind of my first takeaway.
That's awesome, Josh. And just for quick clarification and context, tell folks about the church you serve and what your role is.
Yeah. So Josh Navey, I get to serve as the kids pastor at the Summit Church in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. We're a multi-site church, and so my role gets to lead across all of those campuses.
I love it. So Brittany, I would love to hear from you. In particular, one of the things that I loved was getting a chance to, when I wasn't in the online classroom, spoiler alert for those of you who watched online, it was just a classroom. It was crazy. But was hearing all of the conversation that was taking place and hearing people who are responding not only to the content from the speakers, but also just responding to the fact that this gathering happened. You know, there's some of us who are just happy to be around people we're not related to in person still. But for you, what was the sort of thing you were taking away into your ministry?
Yeah. So there was so much that this conference was for me. I think it was the first time that I was able to attend a conference since before COVID and since before my daughter was born. So it was the first time that I was able to be back with like-minded people, learning and talking about the future of children's ministry and what it means. And one of the things that I really appreciated about the conference was how it wasn't just focused on what does children's ministry look like, but more specifically, what does children's ministry look like in the culture that kids are now growing up in? And so the idea that something is discipling our kids and that we as the church can't just be one of the many voices that are out there. We have to be the loudest voice, and we have to be countercultural to kind of what all the other voices that kids and families are hearing. And there was one word really that God kind of put on my heart, because God talks to me in words. I was an English major. I love words. I love to write. So like God uses words a lot. And
Nice.
that word was rumble. And at first, like the first day, I heard it a couple times during, like when we very first got started, like I heard a rumble outside and I was like, oh, it's thunderstorming, you know, like it's raining outside, whatever. And then I think I heard it again during the very first processing time. And I heard it at one point during worship when I got to stand next to a leader and a friend that we have had Zoom calls and Zoom meetings over the past year, but that was the first time that we were able to be together in person, worshiping together. And then I really heard it. It really became something that like, okay, it's not just thunder, right? Like it's something that God is doing during Cynthia Dixon's talk when she talked about, are we listening? And she gave us that moment to say, like, are you listening? Like, what do you hear? And at that moment, like that rumble just became more evident and more clear. And so then I was just like, okay, well, God, what is that about? You know, like, what are you talking about? And just started thinking about what a rumble is. What does it mean? You know, and it's this low, heavy, like rolling, reverberating sound that kind of builds up to something. And so I feel like God is saying there's a rumble happening in children's ministry, not a rumble like a fight, you know, we're going to rumble, but like a rumble of like something's coming. There's something stirring. God is moving in the world of children's ministry to focus us on child discipleship. And so that word rumble has really just kind of stuck with me. And I've tried to be listening for the other rumbles that God has been showing me since I've been home and as we move forward. But yeah, this shift of, you know, beyond just children's ministry and programming, but really emphasizing that child discipleship, I think is something that I'll always remember and think about when I think about this year's CDF.
I love that, Brittany. No, thank you for sharing. And again, just for added context, you are the founder and creator of Deeper Kidmin. For folks who haven't necessarily heard of it, tell us a little bit about what that ministry does.
Yeah. Sure. So it is an online hub of creative resources made for children's ministry leaders by children's ministry leaders. So by people creating, whether it's curriculum or an administrative, you know, registration forms, basically our goal is to help children's ministry leaders do ministry better and to make your life easier, but also position you as their spiritual leader and kind of the rock star for the kids and families that you serve. So you can find it at deeperkidmin.com.
Love it. Thank you for that. The thing that I think is part of the reason why I was so excited to talk to the two of you is because you guys represent, Brittany, with your work, you're representing churches that are around the country. Josh, you have had a deep career in a variety of in a variety of contexts. I don't know about your complexes, Josh. That's a whole different podcast. In a variety of contexts in the world of child discipleship. One of the things, and Melanie, I would love for you to jump in on this first, actually, is the thing that I'm mindful with the Child Discipleship Forum is we want the conversation to change. Brittany, you're talking about that, right? Like, are we listening? Are we hearing? And I love that word rumble. I'm curious to bring it into a big sort of practical level. And then I would love, after this, we're going to sort of talk about some of the speakers. I see you in the chat talking about some of the speakers directly, but what are the mile markers on the journey of this conversation changing, Melanie? You know, I think about someone who came to the forum, and, you know, Brittany and Josh, feel free to jump in here too. What does it look like for this culture to shift? Like, maybe you've called your children's ministry program childcare for a long time. What are some of the stops along the way? Because I want people to feel like they are going in the right direction after getting the fire hose of information from the forum. That makes sense, Melanie?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that journey is going to look different for every single one of us, right? And I think it's important for you to acknowledge that first off.
Yeah.
And that's part of why we invited you even to have this conversation today, is that follow-up can look one of two ways when you go to a conference that just gives you so much information. And then in addition, last week was a forum where not only were you told and you listened to engaging conversations, you actually had them too, right? You actually were able to connect with people. So you have to, in this moment, identify, like, Lord, where am I at? Like, where is my specific community and church context sitting at? And I think that's the beauty of even what we'll hear from Brittany and Josh, is that from where Brittany sits and from where Josh sits, they're both going to walk away differently, needing to figure out how God is going to use this to impact the unique areas of influence that they have. And so when we are able to then just awareness, like, what does that look like? God, what have you gifted me with? What just honor and privilege do I have in this community? Then you get to shift into this spot of like, okay, so then let's throw it all on a page. Let's write down all the things. And then beyond that, then the question that we're really going to need to answer is, so what, God, of all of these things is specific to this season of ministry? And I think if we stop at, here's a list of all the things, I'm going to try to do them all, we're going to burn out super fast. And we're going to be really overwhelmed at all the work it feels like we have to do. But when we shift it into that place of, God, now what is specific to this context, then we have this sense of empowerment because God's leading, and we're able to begin to unpack what this will look like for us.
That's good, Melanie. Thank you. You know, Josh, I want to turn to you here because I want to talk about some of the specific speakers. We are not going to list our favorites. We're also not going to process all of them like a program, because one of my favorite parts about the Child Discipleship Forum is one of the many bits of feedback we got over and over again was, I didn't know this was an Awana conference, or why didn't you make it an Awana conference? Like, it was intentionally designed to encompass the broad scope of what God is up to and his heart for child discipleship. So Josh, I know specifically, let's use the example of Dr. Wes Stafford, because I could just listen to that man talk for a long time, let alone actually learn from him. When you're taking in what he's saying, how are you thinking, you know, what's your immediate impressions of that talk? And then how are you beginning to directly apply it to your ministry context?
Yeah, that's good. I want to tag on to Melanie's thought of how you start moving. We don't want to be a firework. We want to be a bonfire. We don't want to just be like a blaze of glory and then we're done because we have given it all we had in that one short burst. But we want to be starting something that grows and grows and then lasts for a long time and ultimately create something enjoyable over a long period of time for our families and kids, not just a flash bang and I can't handle this anymore. So definitely excited about the idea of starting small and then growing into what the dream might be one day. But don't let that fear paralyze you from just doing something, pick one small thing, take one small step. But especially with Dr. Stafford, honestly, I've already seen it in the comments, and one of my coworkers and I, we both looked at each other after he got done, and we were like, he just pastored us in that 40 minutes together. He just shepherded the room. So for me, the takeaway ultimately was, this is important, right? And I think he kind of, if I was going to pick one that symbolized the week, that would be what I would pick. But practically for us, it turned into, we agree that this is important, and God agrees that this is important. In fact, we are agreeing with God when we say that. How can we call our leaders or our volunteers into a level of commitment that reflects that importance? If we're going to say, if he can look at a room full of people and say, I cannot wait for you to get to heaven and for the celebrations to come when people from all over are letting you know how you contributed to their discipleship, and they were only kids then, and now you're seeing the fruit of that. How will we not call people up into that joy and into that reward? So practically for us, it's layers of leadership within our kids ministry. Who are people that they are amazing with kids, and that is the leadership level they need to be at? Who are people in our ministry that are really good at organizing other people? And for us, we use the language of team leader. It doesn't really matter what your language is, but what is that next level of leadership inside of your ministry? And how can we, I've heard it said kind of like a bullseye, you got the people on the outside of the bullseye, and maybe those are your substitute leaders. Maybe they're not all in, they're not there consistently. You move in one layer, and those are your consistent leaders in the classroom. And then for us, you move in that next layer and you write the list. I would encourage anybody to write this out, like put names in places and write the names of people that are in that inner core for you. Like, these are the 5, the 6 people that I lean on to lead the teams of volunteers. Even though they're still volunteers, they're leading others more than they're leading the kids, even that their role is to lead other leaders. And then we're saying, as a team, how can we, or who can we help move from one ring to the next?
Sure.
Who's on the once a month list that we need to move into the consistent, who's in the consistent that we need to call up to leading other volunteers, and even who's in our committed core that we need to challenge to be in full-time vocational kids ministry, because we don't want to just be blessing our families. We want to be sending out people that are blessing families and growing the level and temperature of child discipleship all over. So out of Dr. Stafford, it was that joy of serving with kids, and how can we call others up into that in an even greater way?
That's great, man. Brittany, I'm going to ask you for a similar question about any specific talk, because I think it's really important for people to understand, Dr. Stafford spoke for 40 minutes. Josh is taking that one nugget from his talk and beginning to apply it and unpack it for his people and what that looks like practically, which is the heart of why why we're all here right now, why people are watching it online, is how do you take an experience like the forum and continue the conversation? So Brittany, you mentioned Cynthia, so maybe it's Cynthia, but maybe it's somebody else. Like, how were you taking what you heard and applying it to your ministry?
Yeah. So I really, really liked Sam Luce's talk, partially because he talked about Disney, and I'm a huge Disney fan, even though he talked about Disney, not in a negative way, but right. Like, he was comparing.
I was about to say.
Yeah, I know.
Coming across as a
like
Disney
at first
fan,
I was like, wait a minute, but he won me over. I got on board by the end. But he basically talked about comparing Fred Rogers, so Mr. Rogers, and Walt Disney, and how Walt created this fantasy world that kids wanted to be, part of and to escape reality. But then Fred, Mr. Rogers, lived in a neighborhood. And so he was real with kids, and he let kind of the hard things happen and was able to talk about them. And so just the importance of that relational aspect of ministry stood out to me so much. And as I'm kind of moving forward and coming home and thinking about ways to resource the church and to encourage and to equip leaders, I'm thinking about, okay, so then what are the ways that we get back to that relational aspect of things, right? So that we don't have the giant Disney World experience, right? And we focus less on what our environments look like, maybe, and focus more on how our environments are connecting with kids and how our leaders are connecting with kids and making kids feel. Because I've always said this, and I'm not the first one that said this, so I'm not taking credit, but kids don't always remember what we say, but they'll always remember how we made them feel. And so if we can make sure that kids feel connected and loved and part of something, part of a community, making sure that they feel seen by someone at church, then that's going to be so valuable. And so moving forward, like, what does that look like? Obviously, as children's pastors and children's ministry leaders, like, we can't do that for all of the kids in our church. Maybe if you're in a smaller church, you can, but if you get to, 20, 30, 40 plus kids in your ministry, it's harder to do that. So kind of like what Josh was talking about, like, how do we equip our volunteers to catch this vision and to jump on board and to not just show up on Sunday mornings, but to be willing to build those relationships beyond Sunday and really step into the lives of kids and live life with them rather than just teach them the Bible on a Sunday morning.
Yes, Brittany, the conversation around, Disney and Mr. Rogers, let's just all lay it out to be super clear.
Mm-hmm.
We're not saying that we're creating anything that's not biblical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, all of this is founded scripturally on who Jesus was, who he is to us today, and what it looks like for us to follow him as his disciple, right? But then those of us who are intimately connected in the children's ministry community, I mean, Josh, you're literally sitting in a supply closet. Like,
that looks amazing.
Like, anyone who looks at where Josh is at, recognize that there's a part of program that has to happen on a Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Brittany, what you're saying that I think was so important in Sam Luce's conversation is that the difference is also Disney versus Mr. Rogers. It's also entertainment versus engagement,
mm-hmm.
right? And so while our ministries need to be engaging, they do not need to be entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And so as those children come into our churches, let's let them know that they are known and loved, not only by the person who sat with them for the 45 to 70 minutes of that service, but that's just a reflection of the God that we're saying they can follow. Right. And there's gonna be fun things that we do. I mean, my kids they love the, it's like an updated version through PBS called Daniel Tiger, and it's all about Mr. Rogers, but it's put into a different context. And like, they still love that. But I'm telling you, we take those things that they learn and it's a part of our everyday conversation now. That's what we're talking about. Like, that is what that looks like. So Josh, what does it look like for you navigating multi-campuses, and you're looking at a community that perhaps some walk in wanting to be entertained, and you're saying, yeah, we're really glad you're here. Also, we're going to encounter scripture here, and your kids are going to know, love, and serve God, and they're going to be engaged in a deeper way. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I understand, Melanie. My context is not going to be the same as most people's. So I kind of want to speak to principles that will apply no matter what church context we're in. And for us, that means having goals that transcend facilities. So we have more campuses, or just as many, that meet in schools and theaters as we do in buildings that are made for kids ministry, if you will. So we're having to think through, what is it that makes a family want to be a part of our church family? And for us, one of the big guiding principles is that we want to grow a love for the church in our kids. It was a win for us as a kids ministry if our families grow up and their kids love the church, not just love watching a video. I'm talking about love their church family. And so that starts with relationships. That's really what it comes down to. I very much appreciated the Disney Mr. Rogers conversation. I'm a huge Mr. Rogers fan. I think I've read literally everything that's ever been written or recorded, movies, documentaries, all of it. But in some ways, I don't think it's versus. To me, it's an and. The
Right.
problem comes when we neglect one
Mhm.
and only focus on the other. So in a context like mine, many people, and probably some watching this, would expect that we would focus on the entertainment and not on the relationship.
Mm.
But I think any context has the temptation to focus on entertainment and not relationship. And when we do that, we're going to water down the gospel. We're going to have kids that grow up, and what's the most likely contributing factor to someone who grows up in the church and remains in the church after college is that they can name, I think it's 5 or more adults that also followed Jesus while they were growing up. So they had relationships with people that were following Jesus that were outside of their parents. Even though we know parents are the primary disciple makers, it takes a circle around that family. And that's what we want to be as a church. But we also can skew the other way, which is focusing only on relationships and completely neglecting entertainment or fun. Another thing we say is we want kids to be with us. We want kids to want to be here. That's a win. If we win the weekend, then we win the influence for a family. If a family if kids are begging their parents to come to church, that's a win for us. And parents are going to listen to us more when we try to partner with them in sharing the gospel with their kids. So to me, it's a balance. It's a tension to be managed that we can't skew one way or the other. Because either families aren't going to want to be there if there's no fun or engaging value to what we're doing, or we're going to win them to something that doesn't matter in light of eternity if we only focus on entertainment and not on the relationship and the message of the gospel that flows through that. So discipleship happens in relationship, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And in the context of relationship, kids ministry can be an amazing tool in the life of a family.
Amen to that. There's a lot of t-shirt ideas that are coming out of this meeting, including Daniel Tiger is a great show. Daniel Tiger is a great show. Josh, I want to jump off of that because I think you're exactly right about it's not a problem to solve. It's a tension to manage, which again is not a phrase that I came up with, but I like it a lot. But I think, the three of you have a lot more experience in being a practitioner in this space of actually doing the work of children's ministry. And by my clock, it's Thursday, which I think means Sunday's coming. So one of the things that I'm mindful of is you're going to feel that drift. You're going to be pulled into, let's just call it the lesser things. Things like, not even just things that would fall into a bucket of entertainment, but like things like making sure the snack cabinet is filled is going to feel like a really important priority, because it is. You got to make sure the kids have snacks. But how do you, in your own personal ministry context, discipleship context, realign on what actually is most fruitful? How do you go from that, that noise? How do you turn off that noise to actually focus on what's going to make the deepest impact in the life of a child?
Yeah, that's good. I think for me, it's two things. First is goals. I'm a goal person. I'm a list person too. So I have a list of my goals, literally like taped on the wall right here next to my desk. So keeping those goals front and center, like having them written down in a place where I can see them all the time. And maybe you just get a sticky note that you put on your computer that says child discipleship, right? And so that every time you see that, you're reminded, okay, the ultimate goal is child discipleship. And then you use that as a filter or like a pasta strainer, right? And so everything that you do, all your programming, all your new ideas, all the things you've done forever, your weekly stuff, your, once a quarter stuff, your Easter stuff, whatever it is, put it through that filter. And does it support the goal of child discipleship? And if it doesn't, then reconsider maybe either kind of revamping it so that it can, or even letting it go. So the goals and having those goals specific to your ministry and to kind of what you're working toward is one. And I think two is taking time away, like taking time to step away from the weekly, like Sunday is always coming mentality, and having almost like I schedule business meetings with myself, or like I schedule meetings with myself where those times are just for me to brainstorm and to dream and to look at the big picture of things. So when you get out of the weeds and you get out of I need to cut 50 more crafts for Sunday, like you get out of those details, you can see the bigger picture. So you're giving yourself time and space. Maybe it's once a month, maybe it's once a quarter, where you only spend the whole day like thinking about child discipleship in your ministry and what it looks like and the bigger picture of things, rather than just well, what do I need for Sunday? What supplies do I still need to buy? What do I need to print off for my volunteers? So I think for me, those are the two big things: is setting the goals and then creating space to step back and have that big picture mindset to ministry.
That's good, Brittany. I think as a guy who, didn't know what Awana was as recently as about 2.5 years ago, one of the things that stands out to me the most about this child discipleship community is the need for everybody here, everybody who's watching, everybody who's within the sound of my voice, to take that step back. Because I think if there's any ministry, if there's any part of the church that is most prone to the Sunday is coming, it's y'all, because you have so many different constituencies to keep happy, so many different crafts to cut out, and everything in between. One of the things that I would love to sort of dive into a little bit more is this exact sort of idea of the rhythms of conversation and what it looks like to evaluate an experience like the forum. So Brittany, let's keep it with you here, because your context is a bit unique, and you're equipping a community, a broad national community beyond necessarily a specific church. But when you talk about scheduling meetings with yourself, when you talk about taking that regular evaluation time, is that something you're also directly like being prescriptive with your team to do? Are you sort of going like, hey, I'm going to check in with my team who's at the forum at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Like, let's get really in the weeds with Google Calendar about what this rhythm of evaluating an experience like the forum looks like.
That's a great question. So for right now, it's mostly with me, because I don't have a team.
Sure.
And so I don't have a team to kind of, push that out to and to extend that to. But it is definitely something that, like, for myself, I'll put a reminder in my calendar of, 3 months from now, or I'll schedule an email, because Google, lets you schedule emails to yourself or to whoever, right? And so I'll schedule an email for 3 months in the future with just a question, whether it's, something that I'm processing now or something that I want to make sure that I'm continuing to process later. I think there are a lot of ways to kind of extend that to your team, whether it's you schedule those emails and say, hey, you type up a question that you've scheduled to send a month later, or you all, put another date on your calendar to come back and talk about it.
No, that's great. Josh, how about you? I don't know if necessarily you were there with anybody from your team from the forum or what that looked like for your specific context, but how do you translate even an experience that wasn't the forum, right? Like although the forum was only my second children's ministry conference, y'all have been to a lot of these. How do you take an experience like that and begin to unpack it today, tomorrow, and in the future?
Yeah, well, Ross, you might not have known what Awana was, but you passed the Daniel Tiger test. Okay, so really, that's all that matters.
Thank you.
And you mentioned it, but the best way to blow a Sunday is to run out of the blessed goldfish. Okay, so just as long as you are hearing one thing from me, it's keep those things stocked. All right,
keep the goldfish.
That's right. That's right.
And fruit snacks for the allergy-friendly ones, guys. Let's remember that, right?
That's right. Yeah, we got some Mott's right over here. I'm looking at the gluten-free snack bin. I think in your question of how do I process this together with the team, I might be overspeaking what is a good idea here or not, but even people that didn't come to the conference, I put them in a room yesterday and made them listen to Dr. Stafford's talk with me.
Nice.
So, and that is not all kids ministry people that are sitting in there listening to it. And so you got what, 28, 26 days left, whatever it is on your 30 days. They'll tell you if that's illegal, but we watched it and we had a great conversation coming out of it. I just put some discussion questions out there and we talked about it. I think having a way that you review what you do is even more important than having a way of reviewing what you go to. So if I could steer it a little bit, I would say, make some notes of what you can practically take away. But then if anything from Ross's question, it's evaluation is key to us as kids ministry leaders. Do something, but then get some people around the table and talk about it. Maybe that's parents that were a part of it. Maybe that's other staff members that knew nothing other than what they saw when they showed up to the event. But get some people around and talk about it, because when things that you and I do leading a kids ministry, we get some of our best ideas from people that experience it and then bring something back to the table. So I'm sure in some ways, Ross and Melanie are getting some secret feedback right now and doing that exact thing from you guys in the comments that you're making of what is working well, what is not. And that's because they're smart and they're evaluating what happened and then taking it and being able to use it later.
Well, and Josh, I love that you said that it wasn't all children's ministry people in the room, because I think that's a really important part moving forward for all of us, is that if we all just talk to ourselves, to the other children's ministry people, then we're going to limit kind of the change that we can make. But we need to be bringing in the non-children's ministry people. So our worship pastors, our senior pastors, the youth pastors. So I love that you invited a larger group to extend the conversation beyond the people who are already on board, right? Like if you're in children's ministry, then all this stuff like hypes you up and gets you pumped up and, you know, you're super on board. But we've got to start getting the other staff members and the other leaders in our church on board with this as well, if we really want to have the full far-reaching effects that I think it can have.
That's so true. Because I mean, Brittany, what you're saying, a phrase that we try to use to lead our staff team sometimes from the kids team out is that a kid's problem is a church problem. There's not like different categories here. If we're struggling in kids ministry, then the whole church is struggling. So having that group of, whether it's senior pastor, associate pastor, music minister, you name it, the missions pastor, just getting them in a place where they are hearing. If you need an argument to make, say, hey guys, you guys spent this much money on me going, you at least owe me 30 minutes to hear what I learned. Okay. So getting that group around the table and them being able to share is really important.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that is such a critical step, is the ability to bridge that gap. Because often what we learned at the forum is that gap is sometimes much smaller than we perceive it to be. You know, one of the things that stood out to me was some of the conversations that fell under the umbrella of cultural analysis. So folks like Ed Stetzer, even Dr. Christopher Yuan, were speaking to all of us, but those were the conversations that me, as just like a concerned dad about what the future of the faith is going to look like, was resonating with the most. And I'm hopeful that folks who have specific connections to children's ministry, that they are understanding that, you know, bridging a gap to me is important, bridging someone like me is important, bridging a gap to their senior pastor is important, but we're all, you know, equally concerned about what was happening. Melanie, I want to ask you just really quickly, there's a couple of like really practical things specific to the forum that I want to make clear to folks. The first being, you know, Josh acknowledged it, but there's a 30-day replay access that if you were there at the forum with us or were with us online, you should have already received the information about. If you haven't, there's an email next steps. And honestly, just follow up with Melanie or myself directly, and we'll make sure that those of you who are here with us live get access. I'll just even say my email is rossc@awana.org. You can email me and I will do everything I can to make sure that you get access to the content, especially if you're already there for these first 30 days. But Melanie, I know that that's just one part of the follow-up process. And I see some comments here too. What are some other things I want to make sure people know in case they're not going to be with us for the rest of our time?
So I just threw both Ross and my emails in there. Please make sure that you reach out. It is one of our favorite things when we can answer an email from like friends and ministry partners like you. But there was a couple of things just to cover really quick. I want to make sure that you guys know there absolutely is a CDF 22, and that is going to be September 22nd and 23rd. The location of that will be announced when we open registration. So because you guys were attendees to CDF 21, you'll get that information in your inbox. So I'd say for now, just reserve the time, set that aside. I love how Deanna just earlier mentioned, she's like, hey, we are actually sharing all of this stuff with our senior ministry, our student ministry, and our young adult pastors. So can we all just say to Deanna, incredible job. Like, she's actually a dear friend of both Brittany and myself. And like, this is exactly what we hope this would like result in, is that you would begin to have these conversations and watch the replays. And then she even said that they're all coming to CDF 22, because we do believe that when we are able to have more than just the children's ministry leaders at the table. And it's not because that this isn't what matters. It's that we're taking what matters and we're expanding it to the rest of the church, right?
Yeah.
When children's ministry is the priority and we're able to invite our church teams together to have this conversation, Deanna says the conversations we've been having are incredible. That is what God does through the power of an entire church coming together to disciple the littles all the way to the senior saints, right?
Well said.
The second thing I'll just add there is that the 30-day replay will wind up coming up. Obviously, you've just got a little more than 3 weeks there for you to engage with it. But there's an opportunity if you wanted to go to Child Discipleship Forum simulcast.com, where you can purchase access to on-demand access to that through the end of the year. And so then, as Josh has mentioned and as Deanna has mentioned, that gives you the next 4 months to then be able to take some of those strategic talks and perhaps share one here and there with your leaders and with senior leadership, and to just extend that time that you're able to have access to the speakers and the content of the CDF.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm going to drop that link as well, childdiscipleshipsimulcast.com. That is now in the chat as well, so that folks can get all the information right there. I want to transition. One of the, it's been mentioned, but I want to sort of, as we begin to wrap up our time, focus in on the group of how we talk to parents about some of this, how we partner well with parents, those of us who are in vocational ministry. One of the talks that I think embodies the importance of this conversation was with Dr. Christopher Yuan. So Josh, let's start with you. For Dr. Yuan, obviously there's entire a year's worth of online conversations that can be had about this specific topic. So I'm speaking a bit more generally, but how do you what do you take away from a talk like that, and how you apply it to the parents in your ministry?
Give me the easy one, Ross. Give me the easy one.
Mm-hmm.
I will start by admitting I don't think I'm doing a great job at this leading up to what we're talking about right now. So I'm talking out of what I'm hoping and planning for the future as much as anything. If
I just briefly may interrupt, I just want to be really clear.
Yeah, no, you're good.
I don't think anybody with a topic like his is nailing it, right? Like, I've yet to meet someone who feels that's part of the reason why his talk is most impactful. But I think the reason I use his talk as an example is because there's such a tangible sort of felt need and felt place of insecurity, let's say, that a lot of parents and church leaders have, that I think it's a good archetype for how we have these tough conversations with our parents.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, we are in the South. Some people in South Carolina were reminding me we're not as much in the South here in North Carolina as the CDF, but in a semi-urban context, Raleigh-Durham, but still in the South and not like mega city. And these are questions that we're getting consistently from our families about whether it's kids in their classroom transitioning genders in elementary school, whether it's curriculum that their teachers are sending home at school, books that you read, or conversations that they're having in elementary school. So when you say felt need, it is right there for us as a culture, that we can't just put our head in the sand with our kids and hope that one day they come out 17-year-olds that have a healthy biblical view on sexuality and on gender. But we're going to have to be intentional, and it's going to require some awkward conversations from the church side, from the parent side, especially from the kids side, that we're going to put ourselves in a place that really what Dr. Yuan said that impressed on to me was trying to get there first. My oldest is 9. And so we've already started down these types of conversations because the average age for exposure to porn right now is 8 in our culture. And so we tried to hit this at a point where we would be the first one if our kids are average. So that's a hard jump though. You're kind of trusting other people when they say it's a good thing for you to be first, because you're sitting there like, I'm not sure it's a good thing that I'm first. This feels real awkward and I don't know if I want to do it. So that is for me, how can I, whether it's we try really hard to equip our parents to be these primary disciple makers in everything that we do. So thinking through parents and everything that we do. But this isn't going to be something that comes up on a Sunday morning for us as a church family. We're not going to take a break from our study in Genesis to move into healthy sexuality with kindergartners, first and second graders. This is a role that we think God has given to the parent. And so how can we equip parents to have these conversations at home in the age appropriate and in the appropriate timed ways? Every kid's going to be a different, I think, when it comes to what that actually looks like. So specifically for us, it's thinking through how can we create a venue to talk about healthy sexuality to parents at our church and help them begin the processing of knowing when is the right time, challenging them to actually do it, and then resourcing them with what they need when they are ready. So that type of venue, and just to encourage you guys that are here, this doesn't have to be you. There are pastors and elders at your church that would love to exercise a teaching muscle and to be a part of discipling the parents of your church. They're probably members as well. So this is not just you. This is us as a church family working together. And especially when you're coming to somebody and saying, I'd love your help in this. I think you'll, like Ross said, you'll find more common ground than you think, and figuring out how can you partner together and not operate just in silos together as a staff team.
Yes, yes. And Josh, I love everything you just said, because let's remember what Dr. Yuan closed, part of his conversation on this with. He said, this isn't about your sexuality. This is about God saying, be holy, for I am holy. So if this isn't about the sexuality of our kids, because I think as a parent, that's something honestly that I struggle with a lot, is that it's okay. How do I make them know that this is a man of God, this is a woman of God, and this is where we're headed? I think we have to think of it through the lens of it's about identity. And if we're teaching our children from the moment that they're born, then Josh, you and your team, you are beginning the conversation on homosexuality when they're 2, because you're talking about their identity and who they are in God, not anything else or any other hats that they may have. And then that expands developmentally, as you just mentioned, to be more specific about the ways that the world is going to cast identity on them and who they think that they are. And so I think what you're saying is so critical. Let's not make this the thing that's like, okay, now we have to implement this across everything. Let's remember the biblical idea behind it. And then as time comes, equip our parents to have this conversation, and we can partner with them to do that well.
Well said, Melanie. Brittany, I'm curious for you, for harder conversations, broadening out from the specific with Dr. Yuan, but some of these specific cultural conversations. I'm curious, what resources do you find resonate the most? Can you describe? My dog's home and apparently not listening. But what resonates the most with those who are part of your community for tough conversations like this?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, because I think it is going to look totally different in every church context, because every church context is so different. And one thing that I learned pretty early on when I started in ministry was the importance of being a parent cheerleader rather than trying to be a parent coach. And it might just seem like semantics, but I feel like there's a really important distinction between the two, right? Like a coach is someone who is there, who's making the game plan, who's, telling you how to execute the game plan and like telling you what to do. Whereas a cheerleader is someone who comes alongside and just encourages you in what you're already doing. And so as children's ministry leaders, I think it's really important for us. Sometimes we can get into that coach mentality of, well, here's all the resources that I'm going to toss at my parents, and they should be doing this, and they should be doing this, and they should be doing this. And parents are just overwhelmed, and there's just so much, or they are just intimidated by it and don't know how to do it. And so I think part of it and like finding resources that will work for your families is talk to your families, right? Like talk to the parents in your ministries and ask them, hey, what has worked well for you over the past year, or is there a resource that we provided that has helped start conversations in your families? Or what are the times when you feel like you're able to have conversations like that? You know, some families, it might be when they're in the car on the way to soccer practice. Some families, it might be at the dinner table. Some families, it might be, you know, at bedtime, like whatever it is. But talk to the families and say like, hey, when are you able to have important conversations with your kids? And what do you feel like you need in order to have them? Because a lot of parents they just feel intimidated or they don't know where to start. And I think a big thing too with resources when you're sharing with parents is saying, hey, you know, maybe here's a resource that you can use for this conversation, but also letting them know it's okay if you don't have the answer. Like it's okay to say, I don't know to your kids. And it's okay to continue a conversation later after you've had time to process it. So I think a lot of times we feel like resources that we offer are, you know, kind of a one and done kind of thing. Like, okay, we talked about this. Now we can move on to the next thing. And that's just not how life works, right? That's not how the complexities of theology and faith in our spiritual journeys work. And so I think resources that encourage parents to continue conversations and not just kind of, all right, we talked about this, let me check it off the list, but to really continue to learn through them and talk through them as a family together.
Great stuff, Brittany. Yeah, I think because that's such a critical part of the evaluation piece that we've spoken about, right? Like you not only have to evaluate what you do, you have to evaluate the effectiveness of what you do. And I think it is very easy to overcomplicate that. Mm-hmm. You know, people love telling you what they think. So give your people in your community the chance to do that. I wanted,
hey, Ross, can I jump in on that one?
Yeah, please.
One of the temptations, we talked about how do we process after somebody CDF. One of the temptations in processing is that you just flood your parents with all the stuff that you just learned. And I think in some ways, Brittany was referencing that by saying, don't just send a whole bunch of resources and expect them to pull through it and come to what is the best stuff that they actually need to be using. In a lot of ways, I think resources are overhyped. There's a lot of steps before resource. Our parents just don't even know how to do stuff. They don't need just the thing to use. They need to be walked through. This is what it looks like to disciple a kid in topics or maybe even just the gospel. So having this, you can't skip the steps of knowing your families and then challenging your families. And then we get to resourcing once we understand them and once they're ready to take that step. Because I think it can be a temptation coming out of something that just has such excellent resources coming at you to just kind of flood those down. And I would encourage us not to do that.
Yeah, Josh, I think in addition to that, what you just said is critical in also how we implement those changes that we even see within the Sunday structure or the midweek structure that we have at church. And so as Josh is saying, guys, I just want to encourage you that take the next 60 days to just sit, think, observe, and ask questions. So connect with your parents in intentional ways and begin to learn from them. Where are they at? What are they experiencing? What do they actually need help in? Because like Josh said, if you flood them with all of these ideas that you have now come away from, some of them are going to be like, whoa, hold the phone. Like, thanks, man. But they may not even be ready to admit that this is something that they need help and have to have someone walk alongside them through this. And so whether you're evaluating this for your church ministry and what you actually do as a church in your culture, or you're also trying to equip parents to, like, again, don't freeze, don't do anything, but take the next 60 days to just begin to evaluate and ask questions, thoughtful questions, and truly listen. Go back to what Cynthia Dixon said and remind yourself, am I actually listening to what these parents are telling me? Or am I just inferring what I want to hear so that I can create this space that I think is what needs to be created?
Well said, Melanie. I want to acknowledge something that came up in the chat, which was a very important question specifically around dealing with abuse. And I dropped a resource recommendation in there for the Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. I want to be clear that that is something that I've had some conversations with them. They are a friend of the ministry of Awana, but they are something that I just personally take some value in. I'm not necessarily speaking for anybody when I use them as a recommendation, but to respond directly to the chat, that is a place that I think is a good place to start, those guys. So keep that in mind. I want to wrap things up because, Melanie, like you said, take the next 60 days. But Josh, I'm going to start with you, and Melanie, I would love for you to speak from your experience here. Let's get even more practical. Next 14 days. With that sort of posture of take the time to listen, who are you taking the time to listen to in the next 2 weeks? What is your next meeting as you begin to process the information from the form and how you apply it to your ministry? Josh, I would love to have you start that conversation.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily going to go with a meeting on this, but if your church is anything like mine, then you have a committed group of people that are making kids ministry run right now, when the majority of our culture would rather touch nothing but their steering wheel on their way in and out of church. And you're trying to build the largest volunteer team in your organization to lead, to love, to serve, to care with this group of kids that are coming in each and every Sunday. So the Sunday is coming rings particularly true right now when we're figuring out how do we regather, not just as a church family, but as a volunteer team. So the first thing that I would recommend doing that we have done is encouraging the heck out of the people that are serving with you. That's bringing the weight of what we're doing and letting them easily connect the mission to what they're doing on a Sunday morning. So that's the gospel importance. That's the consistent presence of a loving adult in the life of this kid that's holding up. This is God's work that we are doing, and it can have eternal impact, and helping reinvigorate a group of people, honestly, that are putting themselves at more risk than other people in our church family. No matter where your location is, I think that's true. They're more risk because they are just around more people. And nobody sitting in adult worship right now is having to wipe any snotty noses. So we're just in it, right? And in that group, we need to be encouraging, loving, and setting appreciation, but also the reward in front of them that God has given us this task. We want to be a part of it.
Yeah, well said, Josh. Real quickly, Josh, I know you had mentioned this at the beginning, but your church is Summit Church in North Carolina. What is the website of that church?
Yeah, it's only taken us about 15 years to get it, but we have summitchurch.com now. So
congratulations. Oh man, domain fight. Do me a favor, Josh, and just drop that in chat. If anybody who's around your area or would love to check out and learn more about Josh. I just sent a message for Brittany, who is taking care of very important things at home. A baby woke up from a nap, y'all. So that has to be a priority, more so than listening to me gab. But Melanie, I want you to have the last word here. As folks continue to process this, what do we at Awana hope they're doing? But what do you personally, as someone who is radically invested in this world, hope they're taking away from the forum in the next 2 weeks?
Man, I think we are a people who need action. And so when I say we, you need to know that I include myself in that, because one of the hardest things I have to do is to clear space in my calendar to stop. And if you guys remember what Kelly said at the end of the CDF, Kelly was one of our hosts. She said, go to the mountain and go pray, go be with Jesus. Because I think that strategy is essential and evaluation is necessary. All of the things that we've talked about are critical to being able to have this conversation. But I think sometimes we forget that we're all being discipled by something, but guys, it's specifically we want to be disciples of Jesus. And so what does it look like for us to remind ourselves what it looks like for me as a personal disciple of Jesus to go and be with him and to learn from him, and then let that overflow, let that outpouring be the thing that motivates the questions and the thoughts and the implementations that I'm going to then go and make. And so I'd say that that's the first thing, is that go and be with Jesus, do whatever you need to do to go and present these things before him, because that is where the most change is going to come. And then in addition to that, we're going to continue having these practical follow-ups. And so be looking in your email. We're going to be connecting 3 times over the next couple of months with online events just like this. And the topics that we're going to be covering are going to be the next one is going to be digging into that conversation of what the culture we actually live in now is and how to communicate that to the people around us. And so things like Josh and Deanna have both said, they're bringing in their teams. Like, we need to know how to talk about this cultural time that we live in. And so that's going to be our next online event. And then that's going to be led by Matt Markins. And you guys were familiar with the things that he was able to share as our fearless leader here at Awana. And then in addition to that, we're going to be talking about, so what about for those of us who need to keep having those conversations with our senior pastor? What does it look like then to communicate these things to that person and continue to build those bridges, but doing it in a super practical and non-threatening way that keeps that unity so that we can say, hey, our whole church team is coming to CDF 22. And it's because of the ways that God opened up conversations and built bridges between our staff. And then in addition to that, just find someone close to you that you can begin to process these things through. Like, don't do this alone. I know that there are groups of children's ministry leaders who meet regionally, even in cities on a monthly basis. And so would you go look and find one of those? Like, don't do this alone. Make sure that you're able to have this conversation and prioritize doing that with leaders who are asking the same questions. So on that note, Josh, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and also for your commitment to not only being a disciple of Jesus yourself, but also to leading an entire team to make disciples of Jesus in the children of Summit in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, because as much as they may not be quite as south as South Carolina, they are an area that is well established and God has done amazing things in that area. But man, the ways that God is working in those kids is because of the work that you're doing. So thank you very much for your commitment to that. For the rest of you, until next time, we just pray. We pray for you all the time. And so may God be with you and may you see him in a way this week that you haven't seen him before. You guys have a great week.